7.7 million people gone. That's more than the population of whole countries gone from Venezuela in a period less than 10 years. A nation wealthier than Spain, Greece, and Israel combined today offers photographs of citizens scrounging through garbage for food. But what they don't report is that—
Of course, that's a country where you have to ask for permission to raise your prices.
Right.
The government controls everything, and
Venezuela didn't collapse on its own. There's a superpower that comes in, and it's an even more astonishing tale than you know. Just bear with me, because what occurred to Venezuela can occur anywhere. Main content. Let me tell you what Venezuela used to be. It was in 1970 that Venezuela was not just another Latin country. It was the richest nation in the whole region, the fourth richest nation on the planet per capita. Roads lined with luxurious cars, hospitals comparable to European ones. Such a strong economy that immigrants flocked to the nation from across the globe to work. Flash forward to today, same country. GDP dropped by 75%. Hyperinflation so severe that people literally used bills as napkins because they were worthless. Children starving or dying of illnesses that they might have been able to be treated for. And the largest refugee crisis in recent Latin American history. What happened? 2 words you have to know: politics and oil. Venezuela possesses the largest proven oil reserves in all of planet Earth. Larger than Saudi Arabia. Larger than Russia. This should make them extremely rich, correct? Well, it did. Until didn't. By 1970, Venezuela had become the richest country in Latin America and one of the world's 20 richest nations, rivaling countries like Greece, Israel, and Spain. Venezuela was converted into an economic giant from one of the poorest economies in Latin America by the oil boom. But it did not last long. In 1999, a former military man named Hugo Chavez took over as president. He vowed to apply Venezuela's oil wealth to benefit the poor. Sounds virtuous, eh? Chavez converted the state oil company PDVSA into a social program piggy bank, installing political hacks who had no management experience in place of seasoned executives. Let me break down what Chavez did. Nationalized everything. State-owned companies. Foreign investors chased away. Between 1999 and 2007, crude oil production declined from 3.12 million barrels a day to 2.95 million barrels a day, while oil prices increased by 660%. Consider that. Oil prices went through the roof. Venezuela ought to have been awash in cash. Instead, production declined due to political cronies replacing oil engineers. And that's not all. The government ran massive double-digit fiscal deficits during boom periods when they should have been saving, unlike Norway and Saudi Arabia, who prepared for lean times. They spent all the money on subsidies and doles immediately. When the price of oil crashed in 2014, the entire house of cards came down. Now let's move to the United States. In 2013, Nicolas Maduro succeeded Chavez after his death, and he was re-elected in 2018 in an election that many viewed as unfair and undemocratic. The United States government concluded that Maduro had to be ousted. August of 2017, President Trump began what they called maximum pressure sanctions. The sanctions denied Venezuela access to the U.S. financial markets and denied American companies the purchase of Venezuelan debt. But the knockout punch was in January 2019. The United States sanctioned PDVSA, Venezuela's national oil company, freezing $7 billion worth of assets and preventing them from being paid for the sale of petroleum to the United States. Remember, people, the United States was Venezuela's largest customer for oil. Imagine your largest client just informing you that they aren't going to pay you anymore. That is what occurred. Oil output dropped to under 1 million barrels a day, and food, fuel, and medicine shortages, along with hyperinflation, persisted. Finally, here is the argument that divides everyone in half. The Venezuelan government argues that the Venezuelan economy lost $30 billion due to U.S. sanctions, and that they were directly responsible for the sudden drop and deterioration of Venezuelans' quality of life. A Washington office on Latin America report found that the value of average monthly public imports dropped by 46% throughout 2019 and an additional 50% in the year 2020 once sanctions were imposed. One such questionable study found that the U.S. sanctions led to 40,000 deaths between the years 2017 to 2018 alone. But wait, there's more to the story. Economists indicated that shortages and high inflation in Venezuela began before U.S. sanctions on the country. Anti-democratic government, corruption, and weak economic management are the primary causes most experts attribute, stating the crisis is not the work of sanctions, but instead the work of populist policies initiated under Chavez. Think of it this way. Venezuela's economy started collapsing in 2014. The U.S. sanctions, which had such a major impact, didn't kick in until 2017 and 2019. 3 to 5 years into the crisis, with GDP contracting by 17% in 2016 and 16% in 2017, Maduro refused to cut government spending, rather financing the budget by printing money from the central bank at 20 to 30% monthly rates, pushing Venezuela on the path to hyperinflation. It's a building with a shattered foundation. Chavez and Maduro shattered the foundation through corruption and mismanagement. The U.S. sanctions were the earthquake that made everything collapse faster. This is what everybody doesn't know. The U.S. Government Accountability Office concluded that the sanctions, particularly on the state oil company in 2019, likely worsened the Venezuelan economy's decline, primarily by limiting revenue from oil production. Yet they also indicated that inefficient management of Venezuela's state oil company and decreasing oil prices were major causal factors. So both claims are true. Venezuela was already in trouble because of terrible economic policies. But American sanctions accelerated the collapse into outright anarchy. The cost in human life is terrible. More than 7.7 million Venezuelans have left the nation since the crisis began, the biggest mass migration in Latin America's recent past. That represents over 20% of the country's population. Colombia itself has 2.8 million Venezuelan refugees and migrants. By 2017, 75% of Venezuelans had lost, on average, over 8 kilograms of body weight, and more than half did not have enough income to meet their minimum food needs. Broken families, children walking thousands of miles through hostile jungles, doctors and engineers hawking street fare in other countries. That is the reality. That is the painful reality nobody cares to accept. The Trump administration was warned that harsh sanctions on Venezuela would assist in accelerating the country's economic collapse and accelerate a mass migration of millions of migrants into surrounding countries. They knew. They did it anyway. The strategy was regime change. Put so much economic pressure on the country that citizens would rise up and get rid of Maduro. Maduro's regime, even with the financial hardships, became more autocratic and centralized authority, imprisoned 282 political prisoners, and committed extrajudicial killings. The sanctions did not remove Maduro, but they did cause ordinary Venezuelans to suffer. The financial institutions and banks overcomplied with U.S. sanctions, and human rights groups, humanitarian groups, and private companies saw their bank accounts closed and denied or frozen legitimate transactions. Even those who were trying to help were not able to bring money in. Something else happened meanwhile. Cut off from Western financial networks, Venezuela became more and more solidly aligned with Russia, China, and Iran as a source of loans, oil swaps, military hardware, and political solidarity. So the U.S. policy pushed Venezuela deeper into the arms of America's geopolitical rivals. The very opposite of what they wanted. Let's be crystal clear about something. Chavez and Maduro destroyed Venezuela's economy through catastrophic policies. Nationalizing companies, replacing experts with loyalists, printing unlimited cash, impose price controls that created shortages. These were self-inflicted wounds. But the United States acted upon a country already bleeding and decided to take off the tourniquet. The sanctions likely accelerated the sharper decline of the Venezuelan economy, primarily by limiting income from oil production. Venezuela is a warning about the dangers of authoritarian strongmen who promise everything and deliver misery. A warning about what occurs when oil revenue makes individuals corrupt instead of constructing. And a warning about what occurs when superpowers use economic sanctions as weapons without regard for the human cost. The reality is complex. Venezuela's collapse was triggered by internal mismanagement and corruption during Chavez and Maduro. But U.S. sanctions accelerated the crisis and multiplied the suffering of the common people who had nothing to do with it. Venezuela, where the world's largest oil reserves are found, turned into a case study in the dangers of becoming a petrostate, illustrating how years of mismanagement can propel what was once one of Latin America's wealthiest nations to economic and political collapse. 7.7 million escaped. Millions more are trapped in poverty, and the debate continues as to who's truly at fault. One thing is certain, however: the Venezuelan people paid the price of Caracas and Washington's leadership choices. That's the real story behind why the USA helped to shut down the economy of Venezuela. Not the whole story, but an enormously significant part which is most commonly neglected in political noise.